Pixelmator Pro includes an extensive collection of powerful color adjustments. And in that collection, there are 5 color adjustments that are a great starting point for improving almost any photo. In this tutorial, we'll show you what those adjustments are and how to use them. Let's start with the white balance adjustment. White balance is almost always the adjustment you should use first. The reason why is that when taking a photo, the ambient lighting has a huge effect on what the colors look like. Usually, your camera will try to automatically set the white balance, but artificial lighting or certain weather conditions can make that tricky. If the white balance isn't fixed automatically, all colors will have a blue or yellow tint, and sometimes even a green or magenta tint. For example, in this photo, there's a strong yellow tint, and in this one, there's a blue tint. Sometimes you'll want to have a specific tint for an artistic look, because a yellow tint generally makes photos more warm and cozy, while a blue tint will make them look cool and subdued. But when you start editing any photo, it's often a good idea to start from a neutral white balance and make your artistic vision come to life later. In this photo, we can correct the blue tint by moving the slider toward yellow. And in this photo, the yellow tint is neutralized by moving the slider toward blue. Most of the time, you can actually just click the ML button here to automatically correct the white balance to a neutral one using a Core ML-powered machine learning algorithm. After the white balance adjustment, lightness often comes next. This adjustment lets you improve the lighting of a photo by editing exposure, highlights, shadows, brightness, contrast, and black point. Let's check out the exposure slider first. The overall exposure is set in your camera before the photo is taken by setting the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. If the exposure is too high, then everything will be too bright. If it's too low, everything will be too dark. So before you start moving the slider, take a look at the photo and try to decide whether it's correctly exposed. If you'd like the entire photo to be a little darker, move the slider to the left. If you'd like it to be a little brighter, move it to the right. The brightness slider is similar to the exposure slider, except where the exposure slider affects the midtones, shadows, and highlights equally. Brightness has a bigger effect on the midtones. Feel free to try them both when you need to adjust the overall brightness of a photo. The black point slider makes the very darkest area of an image darker or lighter without affecting much of the shadows or the rest of a photo. It's a great way to add some extra contrast without changing the overall look of a photo. Next, the highlights and shadows sliders. These two are useful for recovering detail in the brightest and darkest areas of a photo. For example, if we zoom into this dark area here and move the shadow slider to the right, you'll see that more detail becomes visible in the shadows. And the same happens when moving the highlight slider to the left. More details become visible in the brightest areas. Finally, the contrast slider brightens the highlights and darkens the shadows to increase the overall contrast in a photo. Of course, you can also darken the highlights and brighten the shadows to decrease contrast too. Next, the Selective Color adjustment. This lets you adjust the hue, brightness, and intensity of individual color ranges in a photo. In the histogram here, you'll see the amount of each color range in your photo. Take a look at the photo itself and the histogram, and try to decide whether you'd like to make any of the colors more or less intense, or even change their hue. In nature shots, for example, the saturation of greens, yellows, and blues is often increased, and you can also slightly shift the hue to experiment with more creative looks. Using the histogram, you'll also be able to tell which color ranges are dominant in the photo. In this photo, it looks like green hues are dominant, but in the histogram, you'll see that the greens actually have quite a lot of yellow, so that's the color range you should edit. Keep in mind that it's easy to go overboard, and subtle changes often look best. By now, you probably have a pretty great-looking photo, and you might want to infuse it with a specific style. There are many different ways to do this, and the color balance adjustment is one great way. This adjustment lets you add specific color tints to the shadows, midtones, and highlights of a photo, and can give it a dramatic and cinematic look. For example, in this photo, we can go for a pretty classic teal and orange look by adding an orange tint to the shadows and blue tint to the highlights. To do that, move the central point toward blue in the highlights wheel and toward orange in the shadows wheel. Around the edges of the wheels, there are also sliders that let you adjust the saturation and brightness of the tones in your photo. The slider on the left makes the selected tones more or less intense, and the slider on the right makes them darker or brighter. Let's make a few more changes to the tonal ranges of this photo. There, that looks great. Finally, the sharpen adjustment. Digital images can often do with a little extra sharpness, and this adjustment lets you add just that. The radius slider controls how large an area around edges is sharpened. With a lower radius, a smaller area is sharpened, and with a higher radius, a larger area is sharpened. Be careful, as using too high a radius can result in unwanted halos. The intensity slider controls the strength of the overall sharpening effect. The sharpen adjustment is especially useful when you'll be displaying photos at smaller than their original size. So that was a quick look at 5 color adjustments that you can use to easily improve any photo. To learn more about other color adjustments in Pixelmator Pro, you can also check out the user guide on our website. Thanks for watching.